Testing 1, 2. Testing. I take here. Testing 1, 2. Testing. Test. 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 Testing. All right. So today is a wonderful Friday. We're going to be doing a little light reading, at least for the next hour and a half or so, on the 1,400-page document that has been released by the grand jury of Pennsylvania, indicting, well, not indicting, but confirming allegations against 300 priests who have sexually abused children. Sound like fun? Sounds like fun. Goddamn. Goddamn indeed. What a fucking mess. So let's see. Let's close out Telegram. And Word. Hold on, don't want to spoil anything. So my Internet Explorer is opened. Okay, make sure I'm actually live. I'm coming through. And then share the link on various social media platforms. Yeah, that's right. My health better be green. I'm just going to go straight through this document. From what I've read so far, I think that's probably the best option. But I actually wanted to start off, too, with a little clip from one of my favorite movies, 3 Billboards, which is fantastic. It's where this priest is going up against her, posting these billboards that indicate a sheriff should be doing his job in finding her daughter's murderer. Or murderer. Let's go through a little of that.
And if there is ever anything that you need, we will be there for you, always. But the town also knows what kind of a man William Willoughby is. And the town is dead set against these billboards of yours.
Took a poll, did you, Father?
You know, Mildred, if you hadn't stopped coming to church, you'd have a little bit more understanding of the depth of people's feelings. I had more than a dozen people come up to me on Sunday. So yes, I took a poll. Everybody is with you about Angela. Nobody is with you about this.
You know what I was thinking about today? I was thinking about those street gangs they have down in Los Angeles, those Crips and those Bloods. And I was thinking about that bunch of new laws they came up with in the 1980s, I think it was, to combat those street gangs, those Crips and those Bloods. And if I remember rightly, the gist of what those new laws were saying was, if you join one of these gangs and you're running with them, and down the block one night, unbeknownst to you, one of your fellow Crips or your fellow Bloods shoot up a place or stab a guy, well then, even though you may not know nothing about it, and even though you may have just been standing on a street corner minding your own business, what these new laws said was, you're still culpable. You're still culpable by the very act of having joined those Crips and those Bloods in the first place. Which got me thinking, Father, that whole type of situation is kind of like you church boys, ain't it? You got your colors, you got your clubhouse, you're, for want of a better word, a gang. And if you're upstairs smoking a pipe and reading your Bible, while one of your fellow gang members is downstairs fucking an altar boy. Well, Father, just like those Crips and just like those Bloods, you're culpable. 'Cause you joined the gang, man. I don't care if you never did shit, you never saw shit, you never heard shit. You joined the gang, you're culpable. And when a person is culpable to altar boy fucking or any kind of boy fucking, because I know you guys didn't really narrow that down, then you kind of forfeit the right to come into my house and say anything about me or my life or my daughter or my billboards. So why don't you just finish up your tea there, Father, and get the fuck out of my kitchen?
But thanks for coming up anyway, Father.
Yeah. I love that scene. Oh, yeah, I love it. Love it, love it, love it. But yeah, I kind of feel the same way. You know, if you're giving money to the Catholic Church, if you're giving your tithes, you're only perpetuating this situation further. You're only supporting an organization that has spent, let's see, they spent $2 million on legislation to lobby against sex law reform against minors. That's what you're fucking responsible for if you're still giving money to the Catholic Church in any fucking form. So yeah, you're culpable in child fucking. Congratulations. You still Catholic? Still Catholic? Yeah. If this was any organization, any other organization that wasn't based in religion, it would have been fucking torn apart. It would be over by now. But no, this is the story that just keeps breaking. Priests fucking children, because that's what they do. Okay. Alright, let's get started on this. We, the members of the grand jury, need you to hear this. We know some of you have heard some of it before. There have been other reports about child sex abuse within the Catholic Church, but never on this scale. For many of us, those earlier stories happened someplace else, someplace away. Now we know the truth. It happened everywhere. We were given the job of investigating child sex abuse in 6 dioceses. Every diocese in the state except Philadelphia and Altona Johnstown, which were the subject of previous grand juries. These 6 dioceses amount for 54 of Pennsylvania's 67 counties. We heard the testimony of dozens of witnesses concerning clergy sex abuse. We subpoenaed and reviewed 500,000 pages of internal diocesan documents. They contained credible allegations against over 300 predator priests. Over 1,000 child victims were identifiable from the church's own records. We believe that the real number of children whose records were lost or who were afraid to ever come forward are in the thousands. You see, a lot of this was kept in-house. Whenever a priest got accused, a lot of the pastors would try to offer some compensation, and that would be the end of it. Never going to the authorities, so nothing was ever on record. Most of the victims were boys, but there were girls in here too. Some were teens, many were prepubescent. Some were manipulated with alcohol or pornography. Some were made to masturbate their assailants or were groped by them. Some were raped orally, some vaginally, some anally, but all of them were brushed aside in every part of the state by church leaders who preferred to protect the abusers and their institution above all else. As consequence of the cover-up, almost every instance of abuse we found is too old to be prosecuted, but that is not to say there are no more predators. This grand jury has issued imprisonments against a priest in the Greensburg Diocese and a priest in the Erie Diocese who has been sexually assaulting children within the last decade. We learned of these abusers directly from their diocese, which we hope is a sign that the church is finally changing its ways, and there may be more indictments in the future. Investigation continues. But we are not satisfied by the few charges that we can bring, which represent only a tiny percentage of all the child abusers we saw. We are sick over all the crimes that will go unpunished and uncompensated. This report is our only recourse. We are going to name their names and describe what they did, both the sex offenders and those who concealed them. We are going to shine a light on their conduct, because that is what the victims deserve. And we are going to make our recommendations for how the law should change so that maybe no one will have to conduct another inquiry like this one. We hereby exercise our historical and statutory right as grand jurors to inform the public of our findings. This introduction will briefly describe the sections of the report that follow. We know it is very long, but the only way to fix these problems is to appreciate their scope. The diocese. I'm just getting to make sure. Yeah, here we go. The strategies were so common that they were susceptible to behavioral analysis by the Federal Bureau of Investigations. For our benefit, the FBI agreed to assign members of its National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime to review a significant portion of the evidence received by the grand jury. Special agents testified before us that they have identified a series of practices that regularly appeared in various configurations in the diocesan files they had analyzed. It's like a playbook for concealing the truth. That's where they got that quote. First, make sure to use euphemisms rather than real words to describe the sexual assaults in these diocese documents. Never say rape, say inappropriate contact or boundary issues. Second, don't conduct genuine investigations with properly trained personnel. Instead, assign fellow clergy members to ask inadequate questions and then make credible determinations about the colleagues with whom they live and work. Third, for an appearance of integrity, send priests for evaluation. At church-run psychiatric treatment centers, allow these experts to diagnose whether the priest was a pedophile based largely on the priest's self-reports, and regardless of whether the priest had actually engaged in sexual contact with a child. Fourth, when a priest does have to be removed, don't say why. Tell his parishioners that he is on sick leave or suffering from nervous exhaustion, or say nothing at all. Fifth, even if a priest is raping a child, keep providing him housing and living expenses, although he may be using their resources to facilitate more sexual assaults. 6. If a predator's conduct becomes known to the community, don't remove him from the priesthood to ensure that no more children will be victimized. Instead, transfer him to a new location where no one will know he is a child abuser. Finally, and above all else, don't tell the police. Child sexual abuse, even short of actual penetration, is and has for all relevant times been a crime. But don't treat it that way. Handle it like a personal matter, in-house. To be sure, we did come across cases in which members of law enforcement, despite what might have been the diocese's best efforts, learned of clergy sex abuse allegations. Some of these were many decades ago, and police or prosecutors at the time simply deferred to church officials. Other reports arose more recently, but involved old conduct, and so were quickly rejected on statute of limitation grounds without looking into larger patterns and potential continuing risks. We recognize that the victims in these circumstances were understandably disappointed. There was no place they could go to be heard. Disappointed seems to be putting it lightly. But we have heard them and will tell their stories using the church's own records, which we produce in the body of the reports where appropriate. In the Diocese of Allentown, for example, documents show that a priest was confronted about an abuse complaint. He admitted, "Please help me, I sexually molested a boy." Please help me, I sexually molested a boy. The diocese concluded that the experience will not necessarily be a horrendous trauma for the victim, and that the family should just be given an opportunity to ventilate. The priest was left in unrestricted ministry for several more years, despite his own confession. Similarly, in the Diocese of Erie, despite a priest's admission to assaulting at least a dozen young boys, the bishop wrote to thank him for all that you have done for God's people. The Lord, who sees in private, will reward. Another priest confessed to anal and oral rape of at least 15 boys as young as 7 years old. The bishop later met with the abuser to commend him as a person of candor and sincerity, and to compliment him for the progress he has made in controlling his addictions. When the abuser was finally removed from the priesthood years later, the bishop ordered the parish not to say why. Nothing else need be noted. In the Diocese of Greensburg, a priest impregnated a 17-year-old, forged the head pastor's signature on a marriage certificate, then divorced the girl months later. Despite having sex with a minor, despite fathering a child, despite being married and being divorced, the priest was permitted to stay in ministry thanks to the diocese's efforts to find a benevolent bishop and another state willing to take him on. Another priest, grooming his middle school students for oral sex, taught them how Mary had to bite off the cord and lick Jesus clean after he was born. Jesus fucking Christ. It took another 15 years and numerous additional reports of abuse before the diocese finally removed the priest from ministry. A priest in the Diocese of Harrisburg abused 5 sisters in a single family, despite prior reports that were never acted on. In addition to sex acts, the priest collected samples of the girl's urine, pubic hair, and menstrual blood. Eventually, his house was searched and his collection was found. What the flying fuck? Without that kind of incontrovertible evidence, apparently the diocese remained unwilling to err on the side of children in the face of multiple reports of abuse. As a high-ranking official said about one suspect priest, "At this point, we are at impasse. Allegations and no admission." Years later, the abuser did admit what he had done, but by then it was too late. Oh, convenient for him. It's a good thing they spent $2 million lobbying against sex law reform. Elsewhere, we saw the same sort of disturbing disdain for victims. In the Diocese of Pittsburgh, church officials dismissed an incident of abuse on the ground that the 15-year-old had pursued the priest and literally seduced him into a relationship. Yeah, you know those teenagers always going after people several years, decades older than them in this case. Yeah, all those teenagers, they're just lining up for that old guy dick. That's what they're doing. But this sadomasochism was only mild. Oh, wait, here we go. After the priest was arrested, the church submitted an evaluation on the behalf of the court. The evaluation acknowledged that the priest had admitted to sadomasochistic activities with several boys, but the sadomasochism was only mild. Oh, just a little light flogging as opposed to that heavy flogging stuff, you know? And at least the priest was not psychotic. The Diocese of Scranton also chose to defend its clergy abuser over its children. A diocese priest was arrested and convicted after decades of abuse reports that had been ignored by the church. The bishop finally took action only as the sentencing date approached. He wrote a letter to the judge with a copy to a state senator urging the court to release the defendant to the Catholic Treatment Center. He emphasized the high cost of incarceration. In another case, a priest raped a girl, got her pregnant, and arranged an abortion. The bishop expressed his feelings in a letter. "This is a very difficult time in your life, and I realize how upset you are. I, too, share your grief." But the letter wasn't for the girl. No, it was for the rapist. The church and child abuse past and present. We know the bulk of the discussion in this report concerns events that occurred before the early 2000s. This is simply because the bulk of the material we received from the diocese concerned those events. The information in these documents was previously kept hidden from those whom it most affected. It is exposed now only because of the existence of this grand jury. That historical record is highly important for present and future purposes. The thousands of victims of clergy child sex abuse in Pennsylvania deserve an accounting. To use it the best they can to try to move on with their lives. And the citizens of Pennsylvania deserve an accounting as well to help determine how best to make appropriate improvements in the law. Yeah, let's keep in mind, this is only one state, and this is how much you got. Imagine all the other fucking states where Catholicism is about. At the same time, we recognize that much has changed over the last 15 years. We agreed to hear from each of the 6 dioceses we investigated so that they could inform us about recent developments in their jurisdictions. In response, 5 of the bishops submitted statements to us, and the 6th, the Bishop of Erie, appeared before us in person. His testimony impressed us as forthright and heartfelt. It appeared that the Church is now advising law enforcement of abuse reports more promptly. Internal review processes have been established. Victims are no longer quiet, so invisible. I'm sorry, you need it? Oh, okay, go ahead, take it. I can take a break for a little bit. I'll be right back. This is 1,400 pages. I need to get some water. I'll be right back.
Look, honey, Billy's home from his camping trip.
Uh-oh, looks like somebody got raped by Father Flanagan.
Again.
Hey, sport. Fun trip?
I'm gonna go cut myself razor blades.
Maybe we need to complain to the Archdiocese.
Great idea. I'm sure the church will take quick, decisive action.
Oh, that's good.
Anyway, I've got a better idea.
Pre-stuff. What's that?
It works just like insect spray, only it's been scientifically formulated to repel ordained clergy.
Wow, tell me more.
Look at how these priests swarm around this unprotected altar boy like insatiable locusts. But this altar boy has been sprayed with priest-off. They won't even go near him, much less ply him with liquor, sodomize him, and then threaten him with eternal damnation if he tells someone.
Hurry up, sport. Don't want to be late for church.
Church! Yes! Thanks, Priest-off.
Priest-off, designed by atheists so you know you can trust it with your kids.
NationalBanana.com.
It's your bedtime now. Come on now, Stephen. Close your eyes and go to sleep. Have nice dreams. You're supposed to be asleep. You're supposed to be awake.
Are you okay? Has he been at you? Has he? Get your hands off me!
Back to your seat, Lonnie. You know the rules.
Lonnie, get back! Get back here!
What are y'all looking at? What are you looking at?
I've got no parking spaces in the back.
That pervert Blacken's been after my brother again. If he touches him one more time, I'm gonna knock out his teeth and I'm gonna shove him up his holy arse!
You watch your language, young man. Foul mouth. Threatening a brother. Disrespectful of God at Mass and God knows what else. 10 of the best on each, brother. No tears, Mr. Lunny? Perhaps you haven't yet learned your lesson. Hands out again, please.
That was from Boys of St. Vincent. Oh, nothing, I'm just talking. Boys of St. Vincent. Based on a true story. That was in the 90s. It's like, how long does it have to go on before... Only because it's a religion. Alright. Got my water. Got my sound down. The full picture, let's just go where we left off. The full picture is not yet clear. We know that child abuse in the church has not yet disappeared because we are charging two priests in two different dioceses with crimes that fall within the statute of limitations. One of these priests ejaculated in the mouth of a 7-year-old. The other assaulted two different boys on a monthly basis for a period of years that only ended in 2010. And we know there might be many additional recent victims who have yet developed the resources to come forward, either to police or to the church. And as we have learned from the experiences of the victims who we saw, it takes time. We hope this report will encourage others to speak. What we can say, though, is that despite some institutional reform, individual leaders of the church have largely escaped public accountability. Priests were raping little boys and girls, and the men of God who were responsible for them not only did nothing, they hid it all for decades. Monsignors, auxiliary bishops, archbishops, cardinals have mostly been protected. Many, including some named in this report, have been promoted. Until that changes, we think it's too early to close the book on the Catholic Church sex scandal. It will never be closed as long as you have a Catholic Church business around, because that's what it is. It's a fucking business. As far as I'm concerned, it's a pedophile ring that uses the guise of religion. Now let's see what we got here. Recommendations. Yeah, I already know what the recommendation is. It's just change fucking statute of limitation laws and get these fuckers in prison. Alright, the final section of this report is possibly the most important. It contains profiles of more than 300 clergy members from all 6 dioceses we investigated. It's at the fathom at 300, just in this report. By comparison, estimates of the number of abused priests identified since 2002 in the Boston, Massachusetts Archdiocese range from about 150 to 250. 2005, Philadelphia Archdiocese grand jury report identified over 60 priests. The 2016 Altona Johnstown report named about 50 abusers. We believe ours is the largest grand jury report of its kind to date. Huh? One moment. I'm skipping over some of it. Even out of these hundreds of odious stories, some stood out. There was a priest, for example, who raped a 7-year-old girl while he was visiting her in the hospital after she had her tonsils out. Or the priest who made a 9-year-old give him oral sex, then rinsed out the boy's mouth with holy water to purify him. To purify him, of course. Or the boy who drank some juice at his priest's house and woke up the next morning bleeding from the rectum, unable to remember anything from the night before. So he Bill Cosby'd him. Or the priest, a registered psychologist who treated a young parishioner with depression by attempting to hypnotize her and directing her to take off her clothes piece by piece. One priest was willing to admit to molesting boys, but denied reports from 2 girls who had been abused. They don't have a penis, he explained. What the fuck? Another priest asked about abusing his parishioners, refused to comment. With my history, he said, anything is possible. Anything is possible. Yet another priest finally decided to quit after years of child abuse complaints, but asked for and received a letter of reference for his next job at Walt Disney World. It's the land of magic and dreams and pedophiles on every corner. We came across a file in which the diocese candidly conceded that this is one of our worst ones, but of course told no one about him. Actually, we came across the same statement in the files of several other priests. Then there was the file with a simple celebratory notation. Bad abuse case, sued us, we won. And this happy note in a case in which a 7-year-old girl was molested by a priest from outside the diocese. In addition to describing the abuse and its handling, each of the profiles also include a list as complete as we can make it of the subjects, priests, places of assignment over the course of this career. That doesn't mean we received abuse reports associated with each of those assignments, but the assignment list should provide parishioners with a way to determine whether priests who were credibly accused of abuse ever served in their area. We should emphasize that while the list of priests is long, we don't think we got them all. We feel certain that many victims never came forward and that the diocese did not create written records every single time they heard something about abuse. We also couldn't fully account for out-of-state travel. Many priests who served in Pennsylvania also spent some of their careers in other parts of the country. If they abused children elsewhere, reports might have made their way back to diocesan files here, but we suspect that a lot did not. Yeah, there's a nice documentary called See No Evil that talks about a priest who was just moved around whenever he got accused of abusing children. Whenever the heat got too much for him, they just moved him around. That was it. Although this section of our report is comprehensive as we can make it, we did not automatically name every priest who was mentioned in this document. We actually received files on over 400 priests from the diocese. Some of these are not presented here because the information contained in the file was too scanty to make a reasonable determination about what had happened. On other occasions, we present a profile anonymously because the case reveals a lot about the diocese's behavior, but nothing significant about the priests. And in numerous other cases, the evidence contained in the file was clear, but the misconduct was outside of the purpose of the investigation, which focused on criminals' child sex abuse. As a result, we do not include files involving sex between priests and adults, substance abuse, or financial wrongdoing, unless these relate directly to abuse of children. Yeah, so, you know, these fucking hypocrites want to tell you how to live your life, and a lot of times they're doing shit that they claim to be against. Now, you gotta love that. You gotta love the fucking religion. Just look for consistency in religion. And keep in mind, this is just from one state. Let's mention all the other countries where Catholicism is flourishing. I was going to say something else, but I lost my train of thought. Well, it'll come back to me. Many of the priests who were profiled here are dead. We decided it was crucial to include them anyway because we suspect that many of their victims may still be alive, including unreported victims who may have thought they were the only one. Those victims deserve to know that they were not alone. It was not their fault. We need to end with this note. During our deliberations, one of the victims who had appeared before us tried to kill herself from her hospital bed. She asked for one thing, that we finish our work and tell the world what really happened. We feel a debt to this woman and to the many other victims who so exposed themselves by giving us their stories. We hope this report will make good on that, on what we owe. Alright, the grand jury uncovered evidence of child sexual abuse committed by Roman Catholic priests of the Diocese of Allentown. Evidence showed that priests engaged in sexual contact with minors, including grooming and fondling of genitals and or intimate body parts, as well as penetration of the vagina, mouth, or anus. The evidence also showed that diocesan administrators, including the bishops, had acknowledged of this conduct, and that priests were regularly placed in a ministry after the diocese was on notice that a complaint of child sexual abuse had been made. This conduct was enabling to offenders and endangered the welfare of children. Evidence also showed that the diocese had discussions with lawyers regarding the sexual conduct of priests with children and made settlements with its victims. Further, these settlements contain confidentiality agreements forbidding victims from speaking about the abuse under threat of some penalty, such as legal action to recover previously paid settlement monies. Yeah, good fucking luck with that. Contract doesn't apply if it involves illegal activity. Finally, the grand jury received evidence that several diocesan administrators, including the bishops, often dissuaded victims from reporting to police or conducted their own deficient biased investigations without reporting crimes against children to proper authorities. Offenders identified by the grand jury, and here's your list of fucking priests right here. Grand jury notes the following examples of child sexual abuse perpetuated by priests within the Diocese of Allentown. These examples further highlight the wholesale institutional failure that endangered the welfare of children throughout the Pennsylvania diocese, including the Diocese of Allentown. These examples are not meant to be exhaustive. Rather, they provide a window into the conduct of past Pennsylvania bishops and the crimes they permitted to occur on their watch. In the case of Father Francis Frank, from Holzer highlights the immense challenges faced by victims when seeking redress from a diocese that chose to take a position hostile to the victim. The influence of the institution is evident in many cases. In the case of Frank from Holzer, it is particularly evident. From Holzer sexually abused at least 2 students while serving as a religion teacher at Allentown Central Catholic High School. On June 12, 2016, the victims testified under oath before the grand jury, and they were sexually abused by Fraunhofer in 1965 when they were approximately 13 or 14 years old. One victim was Julianne, now 68 years old. Julianne recalled that during a trip to Pocahontas in approximately 1964, Fraunhofer took Julianne and at least one other girl for a ride in his car. The trip was unsupervised, and Julianne's family was comfortable with the trip since Fraunhofer was a trusted priest. Fraunhofer groped the girls as he encouraged them to take turns sitting next to him. Fraunhofer escalated, and he touched Julianne under her clothes. Once at their destination, Fraunhofer retrieved a blanket and radio from the car and took his collar off. Fraunhofer told the girls that while they were on the trip, they were not to call him father, but call him Frank. Frank. Jesus Christ. I'm just getting vibes of Hellraiser here. It's me, your Uncle Frank. Come to daddy. Come to daddy. Julianne testified that we went, he laid out a blanket and he started kissing, feeling, put his fingers in me. That hurt. It was confusing because you were always told you were going to hell if you let anybody touch you. But then you've got Father doing it. Julianne describes at the grand jury the position of power that priests hold within the Catholic faith. She testified, there wasn't anybody that was more important than, not just him, but any priests. They were, and to some degree still are, but they are much above anybody else in your family, or they are God in the flesh. Julianne went on to describe other incidents after the trip to the Pocahontas in which Fraunhofer had sexual or inappropriate contact with her. She testified there was a gym in the basement of the 9th grade building at Central Catholic High. Fraunhofer would follow her into the basement and make comments that she gained a little weight and needed to get on that scale. Fraunhofer would then lift her onto the scale from behind, hold her breast to get her on the scale. Fraunhofer would constantly muzzle and kiss her neck as well as kiss and touch after the trip to the Pocahontas, and the touching occurred on top of her clothing and panties. Julianne told the grand jury of an incident in which Fraunhofer humiliated her in front of her religion class. She was participating in reading of the Passion of Christ around Easter season. Fraunhofer had her read aloud the portion of the story where the words, "The cock crows 3 times," appeared. Fraunhofer had her repeat those words several times, which evoked laughter from Fraunhofer and the boys in the class. Ugh, Jesus. As Julianne left the class that day, Fraunhofer leaned in and nuzzled her neck and asked the victim if she knew what a cock was. The victim testified that the abuse stopped only when she moved on to 10th grade and was no longer in the same building as Fraunhofer. Julianne's friend also testified in front of the grand jury about being abused. The second victim was taken to Pocahontas by Fraunhofer with Julianne. She was in 9th grade and approximately 14 years old when it occurred. On the way to Pocahontas, she observed Fraunhofer rubbing his elbow against Julianne's breast. Once at the location in Pocahontas, the second victim was also sexually abused by Fraunhofer. Fraunhofer began kissing her on the lips and touching her breast. Reluctantly, she lay down on a blanket where Fraunhofer, using his hands, proceeded to touch her in her vaginal area inside her clothing. The second victim reported the abuse to her principal at the time, Father Robert Frost, who told Forst about the trip to the Pecanos and how Fromholzer touched her and her new friend inappropriately. Forst responded by indicating to the second victim that the discussion they were having had ended. Forst told her that she was expelled from school and indicated she needed to bring her father to the school. The second victim came from a single-parent home in which her mother had left after no longer being able to live with her father. Both parents were alcoholics, and her father was physically abusive. When her father arrived at the school, there was a meeting between the second victim, her father, and Forst. The second victim recalled Forst telling her, "Now, I want you to tell that story that you said. The made-up story that you said about the priest to your father, with your father here." She again told him about how she was abused by Fromholzer. Her father did not believe her and proceeded to drag her home, yelling at her and slapping her along the way. When they finally got home, she was beaten more by her father, this time with a belt so that the belt buckle would strike her. What a fucking predatory organization. The second victim told the grand jury that the school then failed her in English and algebra, two courses that she loved. She expressed to the grand jury how hard it was to talk of the abuse since she had not told anyone most of her life. The abuse haunted the second victim for her entire life, resulting in 2 marriages that ended in divorce. Talking about the abuse she endured at the hands of Fromholzer, she testified, "You can't get rid of it. You don't talk about it. It is always there." Coming from a broken home, she had counted on the understanding of priests and nuns. The second victim said that after being expelled for reporting being sexually abused by Fromholzer, she felt worthless. The second victim broke years of silence when she testified before the grand jury. Her friend Julianne told the grand jury that it took her until she was in her 30s, nearly 20 years later, to find the courage to try to report the abuse to someone in the diocese. Unfortunately for Julianne, she tried to report the abuse to another priest, Father Weasel, appropriate name. Weasel was considered a family friend. When the victim began to tell Weasel of the abuse, he stopped her and told her, "No, I don't want to hear it. You go to confession and you pray for him." As a result, Julianne said nothing more about the abuse until she was unable to stay silent any longer. Julianne reported Fromholzer's conduct to Monsignor John Murphy of St. Thomas More Parish. As she tried to confess the abuse, Murphy told her, "Don't say the name." At the time, Julianne tried to report the abuse to Murphy in the 80s. Fromholzer was continuing to practice as a priest at St. Paul's Church in Allentown, and who knows what else he fucking did there. It was not until approximately August 2002, after the Boston Globe broke the story of child sexual abuse within the Archdiocese of Boston, that Julianne was ready to pursue reporting Fromholzer's criminal conduct to law enforcement. She contacted the Allentown Police Department to file a report and informed the police that Fromholzer was still working at the church that had a grade school. Julianne had personally reported the abuse to the district attorney and informed him that Fromholzer was still working at a church with a grade school. The district attorney elected not to pursue the matter and cited the state of limitations. Julianne told the grand jury that if it were not for the clergy abuse being revealed in the Boston Archdiocese, she would not have come forward to report the abuse she endured. She also indicated how grateful she was having been able to tell the grand jury about the abuse in Fromholzer. Julianne subsequently became involved with the Clergy Abuse Victims Network. She testified that she is aware from fielding phone calls that there are hundreds of victims who have not yet come forward. She described calls in the middle of the night with full-grown men weeping into the phone as they recounted their sexual abuse at the hands of Roman Catholic priests. This is a volunteer effort on Julianne's part, motivated by her victimization and desire to help others. At the close of her testimony, Julianne thanked the grand jury for listening to her story and providing her the opportunity to express her pain. Julianne makes the following statement: "So what does it mean to have somebody care? It means a lot. So I say thank you." There we go. Grand jury on 2016, September 1st, issued a subpoena to the diocese for any and all records related to clergy or church officials against whom complaints of child sexual abuse had been made. Records received by the Office of Attorney General from the diocese numbered into the thousands. Testimony of victims was cross-referenced with the records of the diocese. Internal diocesan records do not contain any information from Julian's reports to Weasel or Murphy. However, it is evident that once Julian made contact with the diocese in 2002, the diocese and its attorney, Thomas Trott, attempted to undermine and discredit Julian and her family. In 2002, the diocese was made aware of reports of child sexual abuse against Fromholzer by Julian and her friend. Victim 2. Fromholzer was still in active ministry. Fuck. Internal diocesan records show that dioceses immediately disregarded these complaints as false. However, Fromholzer volunteered to retire. Having received a report that one of their priests had violated children, the diocese and its attorney immediately began to exchange information meant to discredit the victim with unrelated and irrelevant attacks on her and her family. Moreover, the fact that information that a Central Catholic coach may have been sexually abusing students was used as evidence against the victim. Wait, what? It is the report of yet another crime not reported by the police. A memorandum dated September 11, 2002 by Gobitis recorded a meeting of September 10th between Julianne, her attorney, Gobitis, Schlert, and Trod. In that memorandum, Julian's account of abuse is recorded.
Most of the time, you'll just see the show pop. You'll also see relinks. If you don't see the hunt name, it's usually because it's a relink.
In contrast to efforts to investigate and discredit the victims of child sexual abuse who dare to report their abuse to the diocese and a report to civil authorities, the internal documentation regarding the diocesan investigation of Fromholzer is starkly different. Diocese asked Fromholzer if he did it. Fromholzer said no. End of story. Fromholzer then suggested it might be a good time for him to retire.
Working in the hunt, in Ariela's hunt club. There's another one out that Alpha's.
Yeah, of course nothing happened because statute of limitations at that point.
Which, fine. I'm not expecting you to, unless you're going to start going for yourself and not just hunting as sounds complicated, isn't it?
Holy shit, we're only in a fraction of this. So 457 pages.
Mark it on Ariela's.
Looks like these are accounts.
So that other people know it's dead and don't go looking for it. Yeah, there was.
Alright, these are just like some of their proposals on here.
Having some issues with a levy hunter that it came across and was wiping the 50 hunts that were at the S ranks, and he finally got caught on the last like 2 S.
So yeah, we're gonna go into accounts of all the victims here.
He was caught spawning them and then killing them.
Go back to where we left off.
You know what hunts if it's the 70s, yeah. I like that. It is. Basic rule set, yeah. There's B ranks, which you can go to and you go to your Heaven's Word Hunt lead, pick up the one. It's in Kugami though. Take a B rank paper.
Let's get into Father Edward Graff. Served as a priest in the Roman Catholic Church for approximately 45 years, approximately 35 years in the Diocese of Allentown. Let's see. During his years in ministry, Graff raped scores of children. The grand jury investigated not only Graff's conduct, but the knowledge of the relevant diocese. The case of Graff is an example of diocese that minimize the criminal conduct of one of their priests, while secretly noting the significant danger that priests pose to the public. The grand jury notes that the use of euphemisms was constant throughout the Diocese of Pennsylvania, but particularly apparent in the case of Graff. Terms such as sick leave or health leave were often used to reference an absence from ministry related to child sexual abuse. In Graff's case, it was coded as sick leave and retirement. Additionally, child sexual abuse is often minimized with terms such as familiarity, boundary issues, or inappropriate conduct.
They're the first aggressive one. Spawn.
Bear with me one moment here.
4 hours later,
There we go. That should help.
Yep, and they will attack you if you accidentally swiped.
Where was I on this? Known child sexual abusers were regularly referred to as having alcohol problems or classified as naive. In the case of Graff, his primary problem was documented as being an alcoholic. A review of the documents obtained by the grand jury stands in stark contrast to the acts described by Graff's victims. The grand jury obtained internal diocesan records after the diocese was served with a subpoena on September 1st. These records were maintained in the secret or confidential archives of the diocese as well as personal records. In August 1986, Graff entered the Newman Center in Reading for what was reported as chemical dependency. The grand jury concluded that this was not solely a case of chemical dependency, but that the diocese was aware of some type of sexual contact with a minor. After almost 30 years of service in school and parishes in the diocese, Graff was sent to New Mexico for treatment of undefined but serious conduct on the part of Graff. On November 28, 1989, there was an exchange of letters between Welsh and Archbishop Robert Sanchez of the Catholic Church. The subject of the letters was whether Sanchez was aware of the seriousness of these cases. The context of the letter reflected more than a mere problem with alcohol. However, no further details were provided in the letters. By 1992, he retired from active ministry in the diocese. However, Welsh also authorized Graff to begin ministry to the needy in the Archdiocese of Santa Fe. Let's see. So Welsh wrote to Graff authorizing him to continue your ministry to the various needy persons you are already serving. Oh yeah, he's serving them all right. Welsh noted that this was done by agreement with Sanchez. Welsh reminded Graff that he was accountable to the servants of the parcelet in Albuquerque as his supervision was continued. Welsh also made arrangements to provide Graff with a monthly pension, living allowance, medical and life insurance, and automobile insurance. Bunch of letters they wrote between each other, how good he is. It wasn't until 2002. So over 20 years later, Graf was arrested in Briscoe County, Texas for sexually abusing a 15-year-old boy. Several news articles were written about the incident. Hold on, let me turn up my mic here. There we go. A news article written in the Allentown Morning Call, dated November 2002, reported that the boy Graf, abused in Texas, was hired by Graf to work at the church rectory where Graf was assigned. It was reported the victim stated that he watched pornographic movies with Graf, and Graf performed oral sex on the victim. The news article quoted investigator Jay Foster as saying Graf would hire mostly Hispanic boys in their early teens to clean the rectory and mow the lawn. Foster went on to say Graf always had things to attract kids, like video games, cokes, candy. The article cited in Texas criminal records related to his arrest. In 2002, a victim reported that the Diocese of Allentown that he was sexually abused by Graf between 1983-84 at the Holy Guardian Angels reading. The abuse involved a series of incidents such as showering together, masturbation, and fondling. On June 28, 2003, a second known victim wrote a statement detailing the sexual abuse committed by Graf on him. The second known victim indicated the abuse occurred in the rectory of the Holy Guardian Angels Elementary Middle School when the second victim was in 7th grade. The second victim detailed the grooming techniques of Graf. After the grooming period, Graf had him take his pants down and sit down. Graf then fondled the second victim's penis as Graf masturbated. According to the second victim, when he questioned Graf about the abuse, Graf responded by telling the second victim that it was okay because he was an instrument of God. I'm an instrument of God acting out his will. Don't you know that? Don't you fucking know that? An instrument of God as he's fondling and raping this kid. Can you get any more despicable? I can you even try? An instrument of fucking God. The second victim indicated the abuse occurred over the next 6 months, as Graf would have the second victim come to his room, where Graf would masturbate both himself and the second victim. The second victim believes his friend and other boys were also being abused by Graf during the same period. Wouldn't fucking doubt it for a second. In July 2003, after these complaints, the diocese notified Catholic Mutual Insurance Group of potential liability. Yeah, they received insurance paperwork regarding coverage for sexual abuse allegations, almost like a malpractice. You know how doctors have malpractice insurance in case they fuck up? Priests have to have insurance in case they fuck the kids. When the third victim was between 12 and 13 years old, between 1971 and 1978, the third victim was a parishioner at Annunciation BVM located at Castasquana School when the abuse occurred. In the suite, the third victim stated Graf reportedly took pictures of him while he was naked, masturbated the third victim until he ejaculated, and performed oral sex on the third victim. Graf forced the third victim to masturbate, and on one occasion, Graf attempted to perform anal intercourse on the third victim, stopping only after objection. For many years, the abuse occurred on a daily basis. The abuse occurred in Graf's bedroom or living room of the rectory. Often before Graf abused the third victim, Graf would force the third victim to drink alcohol until he was intoxicated. On January 2007, a fourth victim reported to the diocese that he was sexually assaulted by Graf in 1986 within the Holy Guardian Angels Rectory when he was 17 years old. The fourth victim died in April 2015. The diocese paid for his funeral. Oh, that's nice of them. The grand jury heard testimony from some of Graf's victims. In addition, the grand jury learned of Joey from his grandmother and sister in August 2016. Some years after his abuse, Joey disclosed his secret to his grandmother, Kitty. Kitty and Joey had a special relationship. They would go on walks together. They would discuss their life and the future together. They were best friends. Kitty recalled that after years of a downward spiral, Joey finally told her what had happened to him as a child attending his home parish with the diocese. Graf had raped Joey. During the violent assault, Graf had borne down on Joey's back with such force it had damaged his spine. Kitty believed Joey had tried to tell her this years earlier when he had asked if priests molest children. Kitty thought then it was just the gossip of children. Joey eventually told his mother, Judy, and his sister. Suddenly, the changes they noticed in his happy, outgoing, science fiction loving boy made sense. He was dealing with trauma and conflict. Joey wrote the diocese, 2007. Joey described how Graff befriended him and then violently violated him. Joey wrote, Father Graff did more than rape me. He killed my potential, and in doing so, killed the man I should have become. In 2016, Joey's mother testified before the grand jury. Judy explained that, in spite of his victimization, Joey had kept the faith, she stated. He stayed with the church, and he asked if anything ever happened to him to have a Catholic mass, and I didn't want to do it, and he made me promise, and I did. I did what he wanted, but it was the hardest thing to go into that church and being counseled by a priest. I listened to him and tried to help him out a little bit, but I was against it. But the religion was very important to him, and he was so afraid of going to hell that I think that is why he stuck with it. Yeah, fear of the unknown. That's how they fucking get you. Should have known better at that point. Judy testified that the diocese did provide some support to Joey before his death. However, Judy said that the financial support was never the thing that they most desired. Judy noted, they never admitted anything happened. It was like he was trying to prove his entire life what had happened and that he was telling the truth. They never admitted. They never said that there was abuse. Joey wrote a letter to Cullen before his death. Joey spoke for all the victims of child sexual abuse who suffered at the hands of Roman Catholic priests. Joey noted that the Church's resistance to providing victims their day in court was inconsistent with supporting victims. He wrote, Pennsylvania law does not for one moment bar the Diocese of Allentown from making financial settlements with persons who are abused as minors, even though they might not report the abuse until they become adults. Pennsylvania's so-called statute of limitations is merely a defense of legalistic prescription in which the Diocese of Allentown may choose to invoke in civil litigation when it wishes to have an allegation of abuse dismissed without a hearing on the merits. Joey did not live to have his day in court. He passed away due to an addiction to painkillers. So likely the abuse contributed to his back problems and led to him being on painkillers. And the rest fell away from there. So even more victims come forward related to Graff here. Matt Kerr responded that he was surprised by the reports and explained that we communicated to the Amarillo Diocese rumors that had service, but we never had any contact with actual victims. Kerr said, this is all new to us. These were the same 4 victims described above who reported their abuse to diocese after reporting to the morning call. However, diocesan statements stands in stark contrast to the evidence held within the records of the diocese. While the diocese stated they were surprised, internal records documentation documenting the opinion of the bishops showed constant references to Graff as being a risk, a concern, a legal liability. The language was much more consistent with language used in relation to predatory priests than a priest with a drinking problem. Other victims continued to speak out in 2002. One of Graff's victims testified before the grand jury. Particularly graphic testimony. This victim explained how as Graff prepared and anally penetrate him, he decided that he could either let the rape happen or run. He explained how he fled into the street mostly nude, rather than allow the assault by the formidable and imposing Graff. He further explained the lasting effects of the assault and its continuing impact on his daily life. This victim's mother testified before the grand jury as well. She stated that her son immediately reported the abuse to her after it occurred in 1984. She reported the abuse to Father John, that was your first mistake, and her son's school principal. In spite of his report, Graff continued in ministry as a priest. Why wouldn't you fucking go to the police? I don't fucking understand this whole let's keep it in-house bullshit. How can your faith be that fucking important? That's what I wanted to mention. You know, I find it funny people made a big deal over that fucking Channel Awesome document that came out a couple years ago now, I think it is. You know, a couple years ago. It's only been a year. the document that came out about Channel Awesome and how awful they were and shit like that. You know, of people that have already been fired or killed themselves. Because, yeah, you know what? When things came push to shove, the company fired them. What does the Catholic Church do when push comes to shove and Catholics are actually molesting children? They promote them. They move them. They hide the facts. You know, other people like Alex Jones talking about this shit like Pizzagate, which has no known fucking evidence, or pedo Hollywood, like some pedophile ring within Hollywood, and that all these child actors grew up never wanting to report anything. Some people hint at it. Not really much evidence there, but here you have some substantial evidence about the Catholic Church fucking kids, and I don't see nearly as much talk about it among these conspirators. Go fucking figure. Knew my train of thought would come back. The grand jury heard from still more victims who reported Graff was particularly violent in his assaults and seemed to take as much pleasure in causing pain as in the criminal sexual acts themselves. All of Graff's victims have struggled to move forward, and many question why so little has been done to hold the institution accountable for enabling the commission of such heinous crimes by their leaders. Because they have so much fucking money, and they're so big, they're one hive-like entity that will not be taken down. It's going to continue on from there. Well, I'm going to call it for now. Give you a little... This is just a fucking sample. We're page 49 of like 457 of this PDF file here. So we didn't even just barely scratch that surface at how much bullshit was going on in the Catholic Church. And just these reports, by the way. Just the people that managed to come forward and within one state. Who knows what would happen if you do an investigation in, say, Mormons in Utah or other Catholic organizations in various other states and countries. You know what's funny is I'm going to end with this story here. There was a youth pastor that we had in my church. It was a Christian ministry, and with Christianity, it's, you know, it's individual churches, not really a chain, so to speak. We had a youth pastor who was fucking a 14-year-old. I knew this girl, too. It's kind of funny. She had... kind of funny, after the whole incident, she had no problem saying nigger, but, you know, when it came to saying goddamn, she would freak the fuck out. Yeah. She would be like, don't use the Lord's name in vain. She was fucking crazy. Not because of the abuse, either. It was before that even happened. So we had this youth pastor fucking a 14-year-old. Fucked her in the basement, in the... I forgot what they call that area where everybody comes together. The church hall, whatever. She got... they did things in there. Did things at her home. He would constantly tell her that if anyone ever found out that he would lose his job and go to jail and all this other stuff, that no one could ever know about their love.
Oh god, there's a stab he humped up.
And what did the church do? Did the church report it to the authorities? Nope. I mean, the pastor made a generalized statement that if someone promises you things and it involves any kind of inappropriate conduct or sexual favors, that it's bad. Yeah, they made that little statement after. This is a... By the way, our main pastor came in after the youth pastor was already gone by that point. So he by you know, not to put it all on that current pastor, he came in after the fact. The only reason he knew about it was because one of my best friends ended up dating her, and she told him. And she didn't know that my best friend knew who she was talking about, because we actually went to a little trip with the youth pastor to do paintball and stuff at one point. And so after he promised her not to tell anyone, he immediately drove over and told me. Because that's how trustworthy it was. And this is about, you know, this is over a decade old now, so who the fuck cares at this point? And so, yeah, he pushed her to tell the authorities, actually tell the fucking police. The police brought it for to him in California. He was over. He moved since then. Yeah, she wasn't too happy about it, to say the least. I mean, she wasn't. She didn't like break down or anything. She just talked about him like he was like a boyfriend, because he was like 25, 22 or something like that when this was going on. So yeah, I just find it funny that the church made no efforts about it. She decided she was going to see a counselor, but not a real counselor. No, a Christian counselor. You know, someone that's not even qualified to fucking speak. To like help her with that all of a sudden. But you know, it's just funny. These organizations, they just, they don't want to openly talk about it. They don't want to bring it to the authorities. God forbid something happens about it, But whatever. Until next time, we're on page 49 of this. See you later.
Francis.
Yes, Father?
Would you tell me about it again? The first time you saw her.
Well, the first time there was this perfume. And then there was this smell. I didn't know what it was until these rose petals started falling out of the sky.
So, there I am, telling him the story, and the next thing, his hand is jiggling in his pocket. What are you doing there, Father Tiddly? Pay attention, you're worse than the bloody Nugents. This is amazing facts about Our Lady, I'm telling you, and you're jiggling away there. Man, dear, what are you playing at?
No.
The next thing he bends over shaking. I thought he was going to break into two halves. It'd be an alright fix if that happened. Just what is one half of Father Tiddly doing over by the bookcase and the other half on the floor?
Don't you be bothering your head about them, Father. Get off one of those hands now.